The Senate Intelligence Committee is now officially investigating 2016 Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein for potential collusion with Russia in order to tip the scales against Hillary Clinton in favor of Donald Trump. Now, if you're wondering what she might have done, well, this entire investigation was catalyzed by this now infamous photograph of Jill Stein attending a media conference sitting at the same table as Michael Flynn and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now look, admittedly, the optics of this photo do seem bad at face value, but all you really have to do is apply some simple logic in order to get to the point where you can easily see that Jill Stein probably didn't collude with Russia, because if Jill Stein was theoretically going to team up with Russia in order to sway the election, wouldn't she want to never be seen in public with Vladimir Putin? I mean, would someone who is devious and nefarious enough to collude with a foreign government and literally commit treason take a fucking selfie of herself at this event? The answer is definitely no. They would want to cover their tracks. She would never want to be seen not only in public with Vladimir Putin, but in Russia generally speaking. Furthermore, this conference had politicians from all over the world, and Jill Stein was one of many international politicians at this event. And mind you, 2016 is not the first year that she decided to run for president. She also ran in 2012 as well, and the only time she received even a shred of press coverage was when she was arrested outside of a debate between Obama and Mitt Romney when she demanded to be included. Now, if it were me, if I were Jill Stein, I personally definitely would not have attended this event because, number one, fuck Russia. They're a homophobic, authoritarian country that doesn't care about human rights. Now, our country doesn't as well, but I'm certainly not going to support another country that doesn't care about human rights. But at the same time, if you're going to be running for president the following year and you want people to take you seriously and treat you as a serious candidate and demonstrate that you're actually capable of conducting diplomacy with other world leaders, I can see why Jill Stein wanted to attend this event, but now I don't think she would have done it, knowing the direction the country would head towards in the next couple of years. But rather than me telling you why I don't think a photograph is sufficient evidence to confirm collusion, I'm going to allow Jill Stein to go ahead and defend herself.
I think it's really great to clear the air because that picture has been circulated, sort of a factless photograph that's been used to smear our campaign, actually, for the better part of a year. And it really only surfaced a year after the event itself, which was back in 2015, once the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, emails were leaked. And, and then suddenly, there was an effort to change the topic from the collusion of the Democratic Party to eliminate Bernie Sanders, which was, essentially a rigged primary. There was an effort to kind of divert attention, and the picture of my attendance at a conference, actually at RT, Russia Today TV station. Who else was there? The BBC was there, the national networks for China, for India, Telesur, the Canadian Broadcasting System. This was a conference, a substantive conference, actually, about foreign policy issues. I didn't speak with Vladimir Putin, and I'll come back to that, but I had a chance to speak with leaders from China and from the UK. This is what we're supposed to do, whether we're citizens, candidates, or elected officials.
But you were at Vladimir Putin's table, which is part of what is raising questions among investigators. Let me just ask you this, because you say, look,
and
there is
nothing...
Can I
just clarify?
Yes.
If I could clarify that there was no translator at the table. Vladimir Putin came in very late with 4 that I thought were his bodyguards. It turns out they were core people in his administration, but you never would have known it. There were no introductions, no conversations. Russians spoke Russian. I spoke to the only person in earshot that spoke English, who was a German diplomat.
So, I mean, there you have it. You can believe her or not, but she claims she was there because of RT. There's a lot of progressive hosts on RT, even if you disagree with who funds RT. I mean, you have Tom Hartman, Lee Cam. These are actually phenomenal hosts, and they are objective. So I believe Jill Stein. You don't have to believe her. I certainly believe her. I actually interviewed Jill Stein, and she came off as a very genuine person. There were no red flags at all. In fact, I couldn't get her to stop talking about policy. I asked what her policy positions were, and it took her 12 minutes to answer the question. So clearly, this is an individual that is driven by altruism. She wants to do right for the world, and she didn't want to run for president in the Democratic Party because they're just too corrupt. Yeah. That makes sense to me. So I believe her. But she discusses in this next clip here, I'm going to show you, why she doesn't necessarily believe that this is about her colluding. This is kind of a way of punishing anyone who dared to take votes away from Hillary Clinton.
And in the view of a lot of people in Washington, you got Donald Trump elected. Do you see this as punishment for the crime of running for president?
Yes. Yes. I mean, in many ways, many of the articles, like the New York Times 3 days ago in announcing this investigation, began with a quote from a former spokesperson for the Clinton campaign saying that, well, isn't this great because so many Clinton Democrats are furious at me. They're outraged that I dared, in so many words, dared to think that we get to make up our own minds, that our votes don't belong to Hillary Clinton or to anybody else. But I got to say, it's not just Democrats. This is a bipartisan commission that's led by Republicans.
I'm aware.
And they have it in as well because it's very inconvenient to have an opposition political party that's not taking orders from the same suspects.
Look, if they disagree with what you're saying, and for the record, I disagree with almost everything you say. But if you disagree with what you say, why not argue against it? Why try to pretend that you're an agent of a foreign government? That seems like McCarthyism to me.
You're not the only person to suggest that. I think, this is, let me say, I think there are legitimate aims here in the investigation. I think an interference in our election is much bigger than the Russians, and we have yet to see the proof. I would like to see the evidence of Russian culpability here. When John Kennedy was facing the Cuban Missile Crisis, he declassified the evidence to show the photographs of the missiles in Cuba. Aren't we owed that as the American public? We didn't get to really see the evidence before the run-up to the Iraq War. We are still paying that price, $5.5 trillion and counting.
So what she's saying here, I think, is incredibly reasonable. I do believe that she's correct in pointing out the importance of this investigation, because even if Mueller doesn't find evidence that Donald Trump colluded with Russia, we all know that there is a possibility that Donald Trump may have some unsavory, possibly even illegal business deals with Russian oligarchs, and these could be a huge conflict of interest. Maybe there's a money laundering scheme of some sort. All we can do at this point is speculate until we see the evidence, but overall, I think that a lot of us agree that this investigation is important, but in the process of investigating Donald Trump, this is turning into a political witch hunt. Anyone that basically was against Hillary Clinton is now targeted as some type of Russian puppet. I mean, we've seen Clinton loyalists call for Bernie Sanders to be investigated on Twitter, since he dared to run against Hillary Clinton as well, and many also called for Jill Stein to be investigated, and now they're getting their wish. They're trying to punish Jill Stein seemingly because she chose to run for president. And the reason why neoliberals are jumping on board with this is because they just don't like Jill Stein. The evidence is one photograph. That's it. And yes, it's a photograph that doesn't necessarily make Jill Stein look good, but at the same time, that is not evidence of collusion. But nonetheless, that doesn't stop the media from heavily suggesting that that is in fact the case. And they're so desperate to paint Jill Stein as a Russian puppet that they're even resorting to conspiracy theories. Case in point.
It was very bizarre, and you don't just end up accidentally, as has been suggested sometimes in the past, at a table with President Putin. That happens for a reason.
Talking about orphans.
But what you should know is that RT has been very friendly to Jill Stein and the things that she stood for. They get a lot of airtime. She's been on that program many times. RT in general tends to inflate political leaders and political groups that don't get as much attention here. And if you just watched RT, you would think that these are major political candidates. And therefore, maybe she thought she was returning the favor given all the favorable coverage that she and her party had received on RT.
This idea that someone would be invited, paid, and have their trip paid for to go to Russia, one might almost argue they do that a lot in the hopes that they'll cultivate some relationships.
So that was the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, and we all heard him just say, you don't just end up at the same table with Vladimir Putin, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, meaning she was probably there for a reason. It wasn't this media conference like they say, although in the interview he kind of does suggest that at one point. She was there maybe for a nefarious reason. And what the host implied there was that, well, it also looks like she's colluding with Russia because they paid for her trip. But that's factually incorrect. Jill Stein did not take money from RT. She paid for this trip herself. That's what she maintains, at least. But even though Jill Stein may have been arbitrarily looped into this investigation for no good reason, in my opinion, this isn't even really about Jill Stein. This is about punishing third-party candidates in general. Both Democrats and Republicans don't like third-party candidates. And this next clip really gives you the sense that that is, in fact, the case.
So, Ambassador, you had sort of implied, and others have said, that, look, the margin that Jill Stein took in this election, if you were to work it backwards and you were a little conspiratorial, one might assume that it was enough to defeat Hillary Clinton, which was a good investment if the Russians were involved in that.
Well, yeah, let's be careful. We don't know exactly why people voted for whom, and it's very difficult to measure causality here. But two things are very obvious, that she took votes away from somebody, and most likely those voters were from Hillary Clinton. And two, there's a likelihood that she suppressed voter turnout for Secretary Clinton. So even if they didn't vote for her, those that supported those ideas and were less likely to vote for her because she was trumpeting issues and positions that were anti-Clinton. So it was in the margins, the effect of her candidacy, but this election was won in the margins.
So there you have it. Jill Stein specifically cost Hillary Clinton the election. It wasn't Hillary Clinton that cost Hillary Clinton the election. It was Jill Stein that cost Hillary Clinton the election because she, quote, took votes away from Hillary Clinton. But Jill Stein, she didn't take anyone's votes away from anybody. Nobody's entitled to our votes. And if the Democratic Party wants our votes, then they're going to have to earn our votes. Jill Stein earned my vote. Hillary Clinton did not. Now, this would be a completely different story if I lived in a swing state. I probably would have sucked it up and voted for Hillary Clinton, even if it would have made me queasy, because yes, Donald Trump is in fact a disaster. But since I was in a blue state, I chose to vote for Jill Stein. And if Jill Stein wasn't an option, then I probably just would have written in Bernie Sanders in protest, because I wasn't voting for Hillary Clinton, because I don't vote for conservative candidates in a party that's supposed to be liberal, because that just means that you are enabling the Democratic Party to move even further to the right, which I do not agree with. But the idea here is to shift blame away from Hillary for her incompetence and onto Jill Stein and other third-party candidates. They're trying to promote this idea that third-party candidates don't just spoil elections, but they now threaten democracy because now they're capable of colluding with Russia. But really, I mean, third parties are good for democracy. They're a necessary check on larger political parties, because since we live in a two-party system, we need a Green Party to threaten the vote totals of Democrats so they don't get too far out of line. So anytime Democrats shift too far to the right, we need the Green Party to start taking away a significant amount of votes so they realize, oh yeah, we're supposed to be liberal, we should probably move back to the left. And the Libertarian Party also stops Republicans from shifting too far to the right as well. So these third parties are absolutely necessary. We need competition so that way the big parties realize that they can't just get away with anything. And if the Democratic Party was sufficiently liberal and actually represented their base well, Green Party candidates would never pose a threat. In fact, when Jill Stein ran for president in 2012, she didn't even achieve half of a percentage point of the vote share, and Obama still won, handily so, against Mitt Romney. But in 2016, since more liberals were dissatisfied with Clinton, who was demonstrably more conservative than Obama was, Jill Stein ended up getting more of the vote share. Third-party candidates only spoil elections when the Democratic option sucks. When the Democratic nominee is actually inspirational and can get people out to vote for them, you never hear about third-party candidates. And that's because third-party candidates, again, they only threaten elections and threaten Democrats if the Democratic Party doesn't actually appeal to those voters that the Green Party is picking up. Now, when Gary Johnson took 1% of the vote share away from Mitt Romney in 2012, if you believe that third-party candidates can take votes away from anyone, well, I didn't hear any Republican complaining about Gary Johnson. In fact, nobody even knew who the hell he was. In fact, in 2016, Gary Johnson actually took more votes away from Donald Trump than Jill Stein took from Hillary Clinton. And Donald Trump also had Evan McMullin running in Utah specifically to prevent him from winning in that state, just to swing the election. Yet, Republicans didn't complain. But for some reason, in the Democratic Party, who's supposed to support democracy, small d democracy, we always hear them complaining about third-party candidates. It's not just Jill Stein. I mean, Ralph Nader is another example. In 2000, he's always cited as the main reason why Bush won. But Gore was a very boring, uninspired candidate. See, if you don't actually start inspiring your own base, then you will not win. You can't blame anyone else for spoiling the election because you're spoiling it for yourselves, Democrats. The fact is that punishing the Green Party and discouraging more people to not vote third party, it's not going to help Democrats win. If they want to win, they have to stop sucking and actually be liberal, because when the base is inspired and excited, people turn out to vote and Democrats win. So I don't believe that Jill Stein colluded with Russia. In fact, if she did, then she's probably the worst colluder in the history of the country. And look, hey, if I'm wrong, I'll admit it. But this is probably about what I think it's about. Punishing third parties. Both parties in this country, they have a vested interest in making sure that Americans do not vote for third-party candidates. Republicans do, and Democrats do as well. It's just that Democrats are more vocal in their opposition to third parties. And I get it. Look, we don't want to spoil elections when we have a rogue Republican Party who is proto-fascist at this point winning, right? So we want to do everything we can to stop them from winning. But the fact of the matter is that Democrats only win if they can get their base to turn out. And to do that, you have to stop sucking. You can't blame third-party candidates. Now, I don't want to relitigate the 2016 election because you all know, if you've watched this channel, I've done that a bajillion times already, and I'm sick of it. I want to move on from 2016. I'm so tired of 2016. But we can't move on if the political establishment in this country is dragging us backwards. We have to make sure that we move forward. But things like this, looping Jill Stein in the investigation, I mean, I don't personally care that she's being investigated because I'm confident that she'll come out of this clean. But it is frustrating that I don't necessarily think they're investigating her because they're concerned with collusion. I think they're probably investigating her because they want to discourage third-party candidates from running. They want to discourage people from voting third party. And that, to me, is just immoral.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.